Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. And thank you for joining us for our third Hauser Hour session we've done this year. As a reminder, we designed these forums to be interactive between SCAMP members and key decision makers in political office so that Hausers can pose important questions and receive a lot of questions from council members. And we look forward to hearing her responses. For the agenda, we'll hear a few remarks from Councilmember Raman at the beginning, and then I'll pose some questions that we developed not only by staff, but from members. And then a quick plug for our sponsor. As part of a statewide initiative to use more renewable power, most utility customers will gradually transition to a new time of use rate. So remind residents to we'll remind residents to conserve energy between the hours of 4 and 9 o'clock where rates are highest. Now it's my pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce Councilmember Nithya Raman. She's an urban planner, a working mom, and an immigrant to the United States, and a member of the Los Angeles City Council representing District 4. Councilmember Raman attended Harvard University as an undergraduate and received her master's in urban planning at MIT. I'll just say, Councilmember, that MIT, besides UCLA, seems to be the other place where all the affordable housing developers in the city of LA come from. And as I think I said to you the last time we spoke, I think it puts you in the category of people who are smarty pants. So we're really excited to have you here today. She took a job at the city administrative office when she first moved to LA and focused on issues of homelessness and social justice in her other positions. And with that, I'd like to welcome you, Councilmember Raman, to our Hauser Hour.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be talking to people and to be answering folks' questions about affordable housing in LA, such an important topic. Did you want me to say a few words about anything to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Whatever you want to do. I've got my questions ready to go. So whenever you want to go, whenever you're ready for those, I'm ready. But we'd love to hear a couple of sentences if you've got stuff you want to mention.
Yeah, great. Well, so I think one of the things that I just wanted to point out is that we are at a very, I think, intense moment in LA's history, where some of the challenges around affordable housing, which have been challenges for a very long time, things that people have been talking about for a very, very long time, because of the condition of our streets, because of the extent of homelessness growing in front of people's eyes, because of the overlay between housing overcrowding and the deaths that resulted from COVID and the spread of COVID exactly in those areas where people were most overcrowded. I think we have at this particular moment in history a sense of urgency around affordable housing and questions around affordable housing that we haven't had before. And yet, I think we are also at a moment where questions around housing and housing density, around zoning, are still incredibly divisive, potent issues that elicit a lot of anger from constituents when you talk about density, when you talk about housing. And me, as the representative of Council District 4, which is a very unusually shaped district and is a very, has historically been a very wealthy district. Who knows what will happen with this redistricting cycle, but I think right now it's the third wealthiest district in the city of Los Angeles. It has a huge number of very empowered homeowners associations who have worked a lot on, housing policy and land use policy in the district. I think we're at a moment in LA history where I feel like the conversations around these issues have come to a forefront on a number of levels. And so for me, as a relatively new council member, I haven't even been here a year yet. I think for me, housing policy is actually at the core of everything that we're thinking about for the future of LA. And I think it always has been. I think it has shaped so much of what is LA today. It defines and explains so much of what is LA today. But for me, as someone in office, and it's not just housing policy in terms of what is my new motion on affordable housing or something like that, but literally the practice of responding to constituents on development issues in the district, that to me is such a central part of the work that I do here in this role and in this office, and in educating people about kind of housing policy and its impacts on what we're seeing today as the biggest challenges for LA going forward. And so, I'm happy to be here with this group of people that I think share a lot of the priorities and concerns that I have for Los Angeles and for our district particularly. But I think I want to also just start off by saying we cannot, none of us, I'm talking about everybody here, we cannot afford to be having these conversations with ourselves anymore. We have to be talking to our neighbors. We have to be bringing people in. We have to be sharing our knowledge and our understanding of LA's history and its relationship to land use policy with, I think, as many people as possible in order for that narrative and the history of LA to change. So I think with that, I want to say I'm very excited to be having this conversation and looking forward to taking on some of these questions, if I can.
Well, terrific. I think that's a really well said opening statement. As somebody who's advocated for housing that's affordable to low-income people for most of my working career, for most of that time, we spent a bunch of time just trying to get people to pay attention to the issue. I feel a little bit like be careful what you wish for, because now we are embroiled in a whole different conversation, which is, as you point out, this question of, it's really a democracy question. It's like at what place do you make these key decisions that impact day-to-day life? And what are the policies associated with that in order to accommodate and to deal with some of the stuff that we're seeing on the street today? So thank you for that. And with that, I suppose what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and start asking questions and we'll have a conversation. I would just say that for people who are listening in or watching in, please feel free to add questions to the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. And if time allows, we'll make sure to pull from those for our discussion. So with that said, actually, you mentioned this in your opening statement, Councilmember. LA's Redistricting Commission is developing the new district maps, and the initial proposals have your district dramatically redrawn. Your office has urged for alternative maps. What's at stake in this process, and how would you characterize the potential outcomes? And what might that mean for housing issues?
Well, so I think we're in a very funny place in the redistricting process. It's meant to be an apolitical process at every level of government, but at the City of Los Angeles, it's not an independent redistricting commission. And it's commissioners who are appointed by council members. That's the way it's been here for a long time, unlike at the state level where it's a totally independent commission and state legislators are kind of given what they're, they get what they get. As my children's preschool teacher would say, you get what you get and you don't get upset. Not the case here in the City of Los Angeles because of the strangeness of our quasi-independent commissions. We have these appointed commissioners and they make a recommendation to the council, but ultimately it comes back to council for decision-making. And historically, it has been a very politicized process. Some reforms were made to try and change how politicized it was, but what we've seen in the new set of maps, in the new map that has been kind of moved forward by the commission, is that our district has seen really the biggest impact from the proposed changes. And this is happening in the context of a census that didn't see that much of a change in the city's population, right? So we saw about a 2.5% increase in our census population here in the City of Los Angeles, partly because of the housing constraints that we're going to be talking about. But we didn't see that much growth here in the City of LA. And no single council district increased or decreased by more than, I think, 10%, I believe. Ours increased about 5%. And so we didn't expect to see dramatic changes to any of the council districts. I think because I represent one of two Valley crossover districts, so I have 30% of my district in the Valley, 70% of my district in the Basin, I did expect to see some changes as a result of that, because there has been a push for many years from the Valley to have representation that was proportional to the percentage of the population that lives in the Valley. And so I knew I'd see maybe a little more than other districts because of our unique position, but I was a little bit surprised to see that the results of this map have Council District 4 facing two potential choices. First of all, they put a map together where they have two districts that they have not identified which district they are. They're marked as 2/4, and one is marked as 4/2. So it's either Council District 4 or Council District 2, which in and of itself feels absurd. That's 500,000 residents who don't know which district they're supposed to even be commenting on. Depending on if my district is 2/4 or 4/2, I have two options ahead. One, a district that moves Council District 4 into the West Valley, where I would have 0% of my current constituents there. Or another option, which moves us into has a little bit more of our district, but it would only have about 29%, 26% of our current constituents in it. This is in a context where nearly every other district has more than 75% of their current constituents in it. And some have closer to 95, actually most have closer to 95% of their current constituents in it. And so for us, it's been, I would say, the changes resulting from redistricting are existential for our district and for the constituents that we've had. And I think for me, it's been sad for me on a personal level, because I think we really went out and told people during this election, your voices matter. You get to make a change in city government. And we created a real community of people through the election, who came together through the election to talk about what they wanted for Los Angeles, and who had a vision for Los Angeles and how we tackle some of our biggest problems in the city. And it felt like a really strong community that had a really strong sense of what they wanted for the city and for the district. And in one fell swoop, this map really does take that away. And the voters who spoke very strongly during this last election, historic election where we had so many more voters come out, it does feel like the voices of those voters who came forward and spoke are really being erased with this map. And you asked, what might it mean for housing issues? Depending on the map that we ultimately end up getting, if I were to move to the West Valley district, one of the things that we've been trying to grapple with as Council District 4 in its current shape is that we are a very high resource district right now that has underbuilt on housing. And so when we're having conversations around each district doing its fair share of construction, and the lack of districts doing their fair share historically having impacted what we're looking at in Los Angeles today and the situation we're facing, I think that kind of conversation, which I think our district has been very, we've taken that very seriously. We've taken that responsibility very seriously. It's something that we all talk about in the field. We all talk about as we're thinking through what policies we're going to introduce. Obviously, that wouldn't be, it's a very different question in a West Valley district of what are the housing issues that are at play there. And so for me, I think it just would change. I think there's a lot of good housing work to be done wherever you are in the city of LA. And whatever district we end up with, I'm so excited to tackle what is the most urgent and the most important thing to be doing in the district that we end up in. But I think in terms of having a district that looks like District 4, that it has a composition of District 4, taking on conversations around kind of where should we be building and how can we correct some of these historical wrongs around where we haven't built in Los Angeles so far. I think I would be disappointed to be not having those conversations anymore, because I think that's something we're contributing to the broader debates around these. Oh, and if anyone wants to get involved in redistricting, there's still opportunities. There's meetings happening, so we encourage people to reach out to the Redistricting Commission and make your thoughts known about the new map, because it's out there. So you can just Google the City Redistricting Commission if you want to provide input.
Great, thanks. As a resident of District 2, I was a little surprised at how much change was there, and then I had not really thought through the concept that where you had built this community of folks who had spoken, and that you guys were moving together in a specific direction, which includes some interesting stuff on housing policy, and now that sort of gets diffused, and trying to figure out how to sort of reconstitute that with a different configuration of people.
Yeah, and I think too, like, I think it speaks to some of the ways in which, and this was something that Assemblymember Laura Friedman held a housing roundtable last week or 2 weeks ago. I can't remember. And, you know, she had brought up she had asked some of those, you know, same questions around what are the major housing issues that we are facing here in LA County. I think one of the things that I think is interesting too is when you have a really wide group of voters or a wide group of residents weighing in on housing policy, you have different outcomes than when you have a smaller process, a narrower process, like a neighborhood level process where you're weighing in on a particular project. Like when you're talking about it at the city level or even at the district level, I think there's widespread support for things like building affordable housing. And then when that conversation comes to a neighborhood level, or when it comes to, you know, let's say it's a process that requires more time and information to participate, it really can change the nature of how we think about what we want to build in a local area. And so I think one of the things that I think was exciting about this election, which was the first election that overlapped with a federal election, so there was a big surge in voter participation, was how strongly those voters wanted more affordable housing. They wanted more home resources for people experiencing homelessness. And I think they made that loud and, you know, made that wish, made that desire known loud and clear. And that was exciting to me to see. So
yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about some of those policies. So we know that you called for a comprehensive rental registry for all rental properties in the city. And I'm just wondering, you know, why do you feel like this is important, and what do you think that it could accomplish?
Well, so I think there's a couple different things. One is about accountability. There is right now a rental registry of most of which is regularly updated, of most of the rent stabilized units in the city. But that's only a percentage of the total rental housing stock in the city of LA. And the thing about the rental registry as it stands right now is that we don't have verification from tenants about how much they're paying for units, right? That information right now is only coming from landlords. In the current version, even of the limited rental registry that we have in the city of Los Angeles, we only have information from landlords at this time. And so one way in which you could utilize a more expanded rental registry, particularly in the context of rent stabilized units, would be to actually have a tenant verification, or maybe a randomized tenant verification of what people are actually paying for these properties. And through that effort, you could also actually use it to be an educational tool, that you use a rental registry to get information out about what are the rights that you have, what are the resources you have available to you as a resident of a rent stabilized unit here in the city of Los Angeles. We have been doing these door knocking efforts to get the word out about the emergency rental assistance program in buildings in our district. And a lot of people that we talk to don't know that they live in a rent stabilized unit. So they don't know how much their rental increase is supposed to be every year, or what's the max. And so I think having a program where you're proactively pushing out information is a way of balancing and improving the ability of renters to be able to advocate for themselves and to understand what their rights and resources are. I also think that when you are doing, so a big part of thinking about how you intervene in rental units to protect tenants during an affordable housing crisis, right? A lot of the pushback that you get is around the harm that's done to mom and pop landlords. rightly so. We do not want to hurt small landlords. That's not the goal of city housing policy, right? We don't want to inadvertently harm while trying to do good. A rental registry, which had more ownership information, this is something at the state level that they tried to do, where it's try to get the information about LLC ownership and understand really who is a mom and pop owner, how many units do they own. If you had more of that information available, you could actually target programs much more effectively. You could make sure that larger landlords or corporate landlords or, were facing one set of responses, and smaller landlords, more vulnerable landlords, had a different set of resources available to them. And that would actually enable you to do more for tenants overall. And so I think for me, a rental registry is part of a broader effort to think about really making more robust the system of tenant protections that we have here in Los Angeles, while also taking care of others who are involved in the real estate market that we also want to make sure we're not harming.
Thank you. Thank you. So our next question is that you supported a motion to explore establishing a right to housing policy. And I'm interested to know what you think such a policy, what would it entail? And how do we assemble the necessary resources to make at least the production part, and the tenant protections part of it feasible?
So, yeah, that's a really good question, because I think a right to housing is something that I think instinctively is something you want to support, but it's hard to know exactly how you would implement such a right here in our city, right? And so I think there's a couple of different ways that you can think about it. I think certainly from the lens of tenant protections, when you think about tenant protections from the lens of a right to housing, in a way, what you're doing is trying to create resources at the city that enable people to stay housed. And so for me, that would mean a right to counsel, a right to legal counsel when you're facing eviction, and a right to a broader set of resources when you are facing other kinds of challenges in your housing, right? Because it's not just eviction, it's a whole range of things. When you're a tenant that's being harassed by your landlord, when you're a tenant that is facing poor services in your home, all of these are situations that may cause you to leave your home, that may cause you to move out of a neighborhood that you've been in for a long time, even before you are served an eviction notice, long before you're served an eviction notice often. And so in that context, a right to housing would look like a right to have the resources that you need to stay housed in your current neighborhood and stave off displacement. From a homeless services perspective, I think a right to housing would be very much in line with the kind of services-led, housing-led approach to homelessness that we have pushed for in my office, and that we're practicing in many ways in the district, which is that rather than using enforcement tools to move people around from place to place, which is really what happens when you do a comprehensive cleanup, or when you do say you can't be in a particular location. If you're not offering people a place to go, you're not solving homelessness. You're not ending homelessness. You're moving someone from one side of the street to another. And so for me, in that context, a right to housing means that you lead with an offer of shelter or housing anytime you're intervening in homelessness. And I think right now we're in a position here in the city of Los Angeles where you have such a shortage of housing units that it seems impossible to do that. But imagine if the city had moved from a right to housing perspective from day one, where we would be in our response to homelessness today. We would be in a very, very different place. And I think between these two, a robust set of tenant protections and a robust program of services-led or housing-led responses to homelessness, I think we can get to a situation where we're doing better on housing for our most vulnerable residents here in LA.
Okay, thank you. Well, certainly the questions of right to housing and resources to support residents to keep them from becoming houseless are really important, but certainly near and dear to the heart of the folks that are on this webinar today is really the production question. And so my next question sort of starts to discuss that a little bit. And so just want to express our appreciation for your support for the concept of fully streamlining the approval process for affordable housing, and noted that your motion just passed council. I think it was just last week. It was last week? The same day that the Assemblymember Friedman session was, whenever that was. I don't know that it was that or not. I'm just saying I can't remember exactly what day, but we were happy to see that motion pass. And would like to offer you an opportunity to talk a little bit about what you think can be accomplished with that motion and why you think this is a great moment in time to consider that kind of streamlining process for the city.
Well, so I want to talk just narrowly about one aspect of what excited me about that motion, which is that ultimately here, especially given the kind of density bonuses and incentives that we have in place for affordable housing here in the state of California and in the city of Los Angeles, I think what we want to be doing with our policies in the city, whatever we have control over, is making it possible for affordable housing to really compete against market rate housing, and not just compete, but to beat out the construction of market rate housing as much as possible, right? Because we want more of it. We want more of it. And so in a situation, and the motion asks for, it didn't just specify what we wanted. We also asked for suggestions from the planning department on how we can streamline it, how we can incentivize it, how we can put affordable housing at the front of the queue. I think it put a time limit, right, on affordable housing review. What we want to do is to make it so that, a developer would look at a plot of land and say, well, I could get this done in, I think what we said was 90 days, right? Oh, no. What was that? There was a limitation. We didn't specify the time limit. I'm looking at my notes right now on the motion, what the motion language finally introduced, but I don't think we put a time limit on it, but let's say you were faced with an option for what to do on a project, and you had one path where you knew you would have a certain time limited response from the city with all your approvals, and another path, which was far more uncertain, potentially years long, based on what we're seeing for certain projects here in the city, it's just reality, that you might actually choose with this kind of a system in place, that you might actually choose to build affordable over market rate housing. And that's what we wanted to push for through this motion. In addition to saying we should be absolutely morally, it's absolutely incumbent upon us to be making it as easy as possible to build affordable housing. But beyond that, I think we wanted to just make sure that we were looking for ways to actually change, like have a developer look at a plot of land and potentially say, well, this actually seems better, So that's what I was most excited about. And it is, making it an administrative process as much as possible. I think it was just like a way to elicit from planning their wish list too, because, most of the people who work in the planning department, I think, also see the need for this kind of housing, and they know best in many ways, having dealt with the rigmarole that the city puts these processes through. I think they have it was an opportunity to also hear from them, in addition to kind of listing out what we might have wanted to see as well.
Yeah, appreciate that. And the Department of City Planning has been a pretty aggressive, forward-leaning posture on affordable housing production. I know they're continuing to do some work on the density bonus programs and trying to create some alignment there, which I think is interesting, good. Certainly the transit-oriented communities program has shown that it could figure out a way to incentivize market rate folks to build affordable housing, and at the same time help support affordable housing, traditional affordable housing development.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the fact that we're seeing more units now than in recent years is really exciting. And I think the goal now is to learn from that. What did TOC get right? And they have a lot of lessons that they can put into this motion, but also to think about, okay, where has TOC fallen short in certain neighborhoods, where we can extract more from those developments. A lot of those neighborhoods, I think, are in CD4, at least some of them are, but yeah.
Well, and I know that we've shared these concepts with your office, but I would be a terrible advocate if I didn't mention some of those things that we've focused on. So for example, we've put out the proposal earlier this year about delegating authority to the housing department when it comes to funding decisions about how to use local funds. So a set of dedicated professionals over there, and we feel like that we could rely on them more on making the funding decisions. The other thing is,
Alan, could you say a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So the concept would be that under certain conditions, you would delegate the authority to make not only a decision on what the rules were for funding on a deal, but also make the approval on the funding and then go through the process for actually funding the deals. So in those three instances, it stops, with all due respect, 3 trips to council, which are 100 days in the making. Those transmittals take a really long time. And so we feel like not only would we eliminate 300 days of administrative work, but would also be making the decision, having the decision being made on the city's behalf within the context of the city family, without removing council supervision of the land use and some of those other processes. So still plenty of time and effort for the elected body to review the proposals, but really looking at the department to make some of the lion's share of the decisions. We also have proposed the concept of changing the number as it relates to site plan review, so that creating a bigger pathway for deals to be done by right. Let's see, what's the other? We got a couple other ones. Oh, we want to talk about creating an affordable housing division in the Department of City Planning. So really where all the sort of city family stuff can be determined. In those cases, things can be expedited. This is a little bit building on, but not exactly like the mayor's directive 13, I believe. So it's really kind of institutionalizing that work. So anyway, we've got plenty of ideas, and we'll continue to share those with not only with your office and other council offices, but with the housing agencies also.
Yeah, that's great. And I think a lot of the issues too, I just want to say that I think one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing is to be cognizant of the staffing limitations that both the housing department and planning have. And so as we are talking to them about these issues, we're also saying, how many more people do you need to be doing this work? And how can we advocate for that in the next budget cycle? Because I think they are ambitious departments. And by the way, this also includes the inspectors from all of the other departments, DBS, fire department, all of these people that have to go out and inspect things. Every single time there is a staffing issue there, that's a delay for construction of housing. And so I think thinking about resourcing those departments, those units appropriately and in line with what we need for housing construction in the city, I think that's also something that we just want to make sure that we're mindful of in our office.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And certainly we've been seeing, with a relative abundance of resources for affordable housing development, you can see the stress in the system, right? So it used to be at the beginning, right? We're going to issue a notice of funding availability. We'd take in the applications. We're going to just select winners and losers. And now we're in this in the stage where I believe the housing department certainly is overseeing the construction of more housing than it has at least in the last 15 years, all at one time. You can feel the pressure in the system as those deals move through, and then we'll be on that side on the asset management side as those things.
And the sooner you can do that, I think that because every person has to learn the system, every person has to learn the rules, and like the sooner you can start making those investments. Yeah. Well,
speaking of production volume, there's been a considerable amount of criticism by your colleagues at the council about Triple H funded projects. And generally the criticism is that they cost too much and take too long. Again, as an advocate, I'll just say that, what we've learned from the housing department recently is that that they will produce with HHH funds more than the 10,000 units that were expected when the ballot initiative was considered by voters, and that those will be done before the 10-year timeline horizon that has passed. But it actually doesn't change the way the man on the street feels about what's going on with the city and the investment that they voted for, because I believe, my personal opinion is that the voter voted to get rid of the person who's experiencing homelessness on the corner 5 years ago. And today, not only is that person still there, but has been joined by another person. And so I'm interested in your reflections on Triple H, its performance. Is there anything that we can do or anything that we need to do to change that narrative?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think there is a huge amount of work that we need to do on changing the narratives around homelessness overall. And HHH is definitely one of them. I mean, count me among those who have been critical of HHH as well, And I think part of the challenge with HHH was perhaps in a mismatch of expectations. That, as you said, that you thought that people were voting for somebody on their street to be gone.
I think they were voting to get rid of homelessness. I think.
Yeah, and I actually, and maybe yes. And this is interesting because I do use terminology like ending homelessness. I think about that and I talk about that, and I think we can if we build enough and if we have enough shelter beds and housing units available for people. But I think you're absolutely right that we do need to make sure that we are setting expectations for how long that housing will take and how much it will cost. And B, that what are the impacts of that housing going to be? And I think putting the housing that we're building through HHH in the context of how severe our housing shortage is, I think would be one way in which you could ameliorate some of those, some of that disappointment. To say that this is one piece of a broader set of housing responses, and it's a drop in the bucket compared to the extent of need that we have. I think that might be one way to think about it. I think being honest with some of that. Like, I do think that part of what sometimes feels a little bit crazy making, and frankly, some of the people who get some of the stuff that I've said that has garnered the strongest negative reactions has been where people are like, but you're not seeing what I'm seeing, right? So I think part of what I think we need to be better at doing is being real about where we failed and being real about unexpected challenges, being real about the fact that things take longer and cost more than we expected them to, and being real about the fact that the problem grew in ways that we didn't know it was going to. And I think the more that we can talk about that and the more that we can be honest about that, the more that people will trust that the government can actually take on some of these challenges. So one thing, for example, that I always did during any talk related to homelessness that I was involved with was to talk about mental illness and to talk about drug addiction. Because there was a tendency I felt in like maybe 2 or 3 years ago in particular, where whenever somebody complained about, oh, people are just using drugs, that's why they're on the street, to minimize drug use and to minimize mental illness and to say, well, it's actually an affordable housing, it's an affordable housing crisis. Well, it is an affordable housing crisis, of course. To me, that is the primary reason for why homelessness has increased over the past few years. But there is also no denying the extent to which people who are experiencing homelessness are also suffering from other vulnerabilities like substance abuse and mental illness, that when you have no housing that you can be in, that any vulnerabilities you have are accentuated and made worse by living on the streets. That we are in Southern California. What more what better place to talk about addiction and have people receive that message with compassion than this place, you know? And so I think talking to people honestly about what people are going through and saying, how do we make it so that they can overcome those vulnerabilities, was very fruitful for me in changing the nature of the conversations that people were having around homelessness. And I feel like that's what we need to do in terms of HHH housing. It's like, oh, okay, it did cost a lot. It did take a really long time. So how do we fix it? You know, as opposed to defending it, really saying, how are we grappling with it? What lessons are we learning from it? Okay, we guess what? Actually was more successful than a lot of people think. Here are the numbers, what you just said in the beginning. But also here's everything that we've learned from it and how we can do it better, because we're going to come back to you and ask you for a little bit more money. And next time we're going to do this, this, and this, and here are the results that you're going to see. I think that's the way that we need to be thinking about next steps in terms of HHH and changing the narrative around it, is really by speaking to people honestly and truthfully about what we went through over this past cycle.
That's terrific. Thank you so much. I think you know, it harkens back to your original comments around this idea that we need to be in dialogue, right? We're all neighbors. We need to be in dialogue about what each of us wants and what each of us thinks is really important, and we do need to learn from the past. And actually, as I'm realizing we're sort of coming up on time, I want to ask you a question about capacity for innovation. So it's really around this idea. There's a growing conversation and push towards what people are calling social housing, or sort of community-centered ownership of housing, creating kind of opportunity for local residents to have a more important role in not only the nature of their housing, but the affordability of it, and then in some cases the appreciation of the value of that housing over time. And so I'm wondering if you could take a minute to talk a little bit about what you sort of see from your perspective about the development of new types of housing in the coming years, and what you think are the ways that we should work through that in the public policy context.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is definitely an opportunity to think about a diversity of housing options for people. And, you know, I think we need to be thinking about all of these different models, partly because I think so the primary way in which we've promoted affordable housing and successfully increased number of affordable housing units in the city of LA so far, you know, especially these last few years, is through density bonuses and incentive programs, right? But I think those also do generate, just politically speaking, those also generate some pushback. People think that developers are getting away with stuff, that they're not, you know, that the bonus programs, you know, TOC is not extracting enough from developers. And so I think making sure that the city is investing in a range of housing models in addressing this problem, I think will also generate more goodwill for housing overall. right? And so trying to find ways to invest in things like community land trusts or community cooperatives, trying to think about, okay, we have a city-owned lot that we can use for an affordable housing unit, but can we think of this as as you said, a place where someone can move into it and also earn equity in it in some way? Or, what are the different tools that we have across the country to try and find other ways of promoting affordable housing is really, I think, important. The other thing too is, and I know there has been pushback from people who are vocal about homelessness on some of the new housing models that have come up, things like the tiny homes and Project Room Key and things like that. But for me, one of the biggest lessons that I learned from Home Key, Room Key, tiny homes is that when you go out to someone who's experiencing homelessness and offer them a room where they can close the door and have privacy, that is so attractive for people, And so as we're investing in housing for people experiencing homelessness, if we can use that as a kind of the gold standard for how we invest in that housing, I think it could be a very exciting place to think about innovative responses to this, right? So maybe it's SRO, dormitory style housing. Maybe it is shared housing through master leasing. Maybe it is, I just think that there's a number of ways in which you can think about housing that challenges some of the ways in which we think about housing here in America, which has a defined kind of set of, this is the size of an acceptable unit, this is what an acceptable unit has to have, and really look at the reality of living conditions for so many people and say, well, let's improve this, let's make it realistic, let's make it flexible, and let's try and build more of what works for people. And putting people and their sense of community at the center of it, I think also can really be helpful in thinking through those options. We do have a lot of scope to be innovative. And I think particularly these 2 years where there's a lot of money coming in from the state government, where there's more money, I think philanthropic dollars also flowing for these things. I think this is an opportunity to push ourselves. And, I would love to find ways to push ourselves, maybe in partnership with you, Alan.
I look forward to continuing to work with you on that. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's been interesting in the last 12 months is that there's been a lot of, as you say, money from the state, some of it money from the feds, that kind of defangs the limited resource conversation, like we have to do this or that. This allows us to do both. I mean, I think there's a pretty strong consensus that the long-term solution for folks who are experiencing homelessness is housing with services that's permanent, right? And so that is the long-term answer. But how do we do that is absolutely something that we need to continue to innovate and work on. So totally agree with you on that. And then just the sheltering people is make sure that we're doing the best to get people off the street is also a gigantic public policy matter. I will just say that one of the things I've seen our members do with great effect is to bring residents of an area that has a proposed affordable housing development to a place where there is an affordable housing development, where they actually get to see what it looks like in context. And many times people don't even understand that what they're looking at as they drive by is an affordable housing place. But people didn't come here to listen to me. They came to listen to you. I actually want to offer you a couple of minutes to close this out. I'm going to let you get back on schedule. So the floor is yours. Thank you so much for coming by today and for all the terrific work you're doing. We look forward to working with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm really happy to have had this space to discuss with you. I know my team, especially my planning team, they're both in the room with me here. They're really excited too, and always grateful to be learning from the work of SCAMP. I think one of the things that I think is so interesting about this, I think we're in this funny moment in cities where I think there isn't widespread agreement on what progressive housing policy looks like. Because I think the conversations right now that we've been having have been in many ways somewhat limited. We can talk about tenant protections, we can talk about social housing, and I think there's agreement on that. Everything else, unless Joe Biden writes me a check for billions of dollars, we have to think about other models that involves the private real estate market. And I think trying to figure out what is the widespread consensus on the right way to work with the private real estate market to get what we need out of it, to extract exactly the kind of units that are going to match the needs that are in the city of Los Angeles. We need to have that conversation. And we have to do more education. We have to bring people together. We have to work on making people excited about that. And that's to me, that's the big challenge ahead. Because it can't just be the few of us that already are talking about these issues in the room with each other. It has to be a movement. It has to be everyone in the community saying, this is what we want and this is what we need. And I am just excited to be in this position where I feel like we can have those conversations, and they're not easy conversations, and they elicit really strong responses from people, but we have to be having them. We're past the point where we cannot have them, and where we can default to the things that no one has any disagreement about. Like we're past that point.
Yeah, and we're definitely at the break the glass kind of moment.
Yeah.
So, well, for my part, I'm going to go back and I'm going to talk to my members, and we're going to talk to our coalition partners, and we're going to continue to come back to you and to council and to other bodies where legislative decisions are made, and figure out not only how to make sure that we're protecting the interests of folks who are currently housed, but also in the business of producing new housing that's affordable low-income people, and look forward to working with you on that.
Likewise, and thank you again.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, Councilmember Raman. We'll see you soon.
Yep.
All right.